The late afternoon sun painted the quiet neighborhood in golden hues, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of upscale Brooklyn homes. The distant hum of traffic and the occasional laughter of children filled the air, an ordinary, peaceful day. But inside the Tyson household, that peace was about to be shattered. Mike Tyson sat at the kitchen table, his massive frame relaxed as he sipped a post-workout protein shake. Across from him, his wife Vanessa hummed softly while chopping vegetables for dinner. The rhythmic clatter of the knife against the cutting board was the only sound, until the front door creaked open. A chill ran down Vanessa's spine as she turned toward the entrance. Her breath caught in her throat. The knife slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the floor. Standing in the doorway was their 7-year-old daughter, Mia, barefoot, her body trembling, and wearing nothing but a diaper. Her school backpack hung loosely from her tiny shoulders, as if it were the only thing shielding her from the world. Tear-streaked cheeks, red, blotchy skin, wide, terrified eyes. The silence was suffocating. Mike's grip on the counter tightened, his knuckles turning white. Vanessa let out a strangled gasp, her heart pounding against her ribs. But neither moved. They were paralyzed by the sheer horror of what they were seeing. Then, without a word, Mike shot forward, his towering presence swallowing his daughter in an embrace. Mia's small hands clung to his shirt as she sobbed uncontrollably. Vanessa dropped to her knees beside them, voice barely above a whisper. "Mia, baby, what happened?" Mike Tyson's arms wrapped tightly around his daughter as her tiny body trembled against him. Her sobs came in ragged gasps, each one cutting deeper into his chest like a blade. Vanessa knelt beside them, her hands hovering over Mia's tear-streaked face, gently pushing back damp curls. "Sweetheart, talk to me," she whispered, her voice barely steady. "Who did this to you?" Mia hiccuped, gripping Mike's shirt as if she were afraid to let go. Her little fingers dug into the fabric, her breath hitching. "Mr. Calloway," she finally choked out. Vanessa's breath caught. Mike went completely still. The name hit him like a freight train, slamming into his chest with a force that made his pulse thunder in his ears. "Your teacher?" His voice was dangerously low, each syllable measured. Mia nodded hesitantly, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks. He took my skirt," she whispered. "He said, our kind should be seen this way." Time stopped. Mike's mind locked onto two words. Our kind. A fire ignited in his chest, burning so hot it nearly consumed him. His fingers twitched, his breath came slow and heavy. He had spent years controlling his rage, learning to wield his power with precision. But this was different. This was his little girl. Vanessa clapped a hand over her mouth, her body shaking as silent tears streamed down her face. "He took your clothes?" she gasped, her voice raw with disbelief. Mia nodded, her eyes darting between them, panic flashing in her expression. "Daddy, please don't be mad," she whispered, her voice small, afraid. Mike clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay still. He wasn't mad at her. He was mad at the monster who did this. Gently, he cupped Mia's cheeks, his massive hands dwarfing her face. He forced his voice to stay calm, even though every muscle in his body screamed for vengeance. "You listen to me, baby girl," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me?" Mia sniffled, nodding. "What he did," Mike's voice cracked slightly before he steadied it, "was evil. No one gets to treat you like that." Vanessa wrapped Mia in her arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead. But her eyes flicked to Mike, and he saw it, the same thing boiling inside him. This wasn't just about humiliation, it was about power, about stripping a child of her dignity, about making her feel less than human. Mike slowly stood. His movements were eerily controlled, deliberate. Vanessa stiffened. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice edged with fear. Mike didn't answer. He turned and marched toward the stairs. "Mike!" Vanessa's voice wavered. She followed him, watching as he opened their dresser drawer and pulled out his wallet, his keys, and his holster. Her breath caught. "No," she whispered, stepping forward. "You don't need your gun for this." Mike exhaled sharply, gripping the leather strap. He still didn't look at her. "I'm going to the school." Vanessa's fingers curled around his arm, her grip desperate. "Mike, please, don't do something you'll regret." For the first time since Mia stepped onto that driveway, he turned to look at his wife. And for the first time, he let her see it, the storm raging inside him. "I won't regret it," he said simply. Then he walked past her, down the stairs, out the front door, and into his truck. His knuckles turned white around the steering wheel as he pulled out of the driveway and floored the gas pedal. The quiet, peaceful Brooklyn neighborhood disappeared behind him, left in the dust of his rage. Next stop, Callaway. And Mike Tyson wasn't leaving until he got justice. What do you think Mike should do next? Should he take matters into his own hands or let the school handle it? Comment below. If you think Mike should confront Callaway, type justice in the comments. If you think he should wait for the authorities, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. This is only the beginning. Stay tuned. The roar of the engine filled the quiet streets as Mike Tyson's truck tore through Brooklyn, his hands gripping the wheel like a vice. The streetlights flickered across his face, illuminating the sheer determination set in his jaw, the fire burning behind his eyes. Every muscle in his body was wound tight, his pulse hammering in his ears like the countdown to an explosion. He wasn't just angry, he was livid. His little girl, his baby, had been humiliated, stripped of her dignity, targeted by a man who was supposed to protect and teach her. And that man was still out there, probably thinking he'd get away with it. Not tonight. Mike barely remembered pulling into the school parking lot. His tires screeched as he threw the truck into park, shoving the door open before the vehicle had even fully stopped. The night air was cool, but his blood boiled hot beneath his skin. The school loomed ahead, a place meant to be safe, yet it had failed his daughter in the worst way possible. As he stomped toward the front doors, a few late-leaving parents turned to look at him. Some recognized him immediately, his massive frame, the unmistakable face of a former world champion. But one look at his expression made them step aside. He wasn't here for autographs. He was here for justice. Inside, the fluorescent lights of the school's front office buzzed softly. A woman at the reception desk looked up, offering the kind of polite, scripted smile she gave every visitor, until she met his eyes. Her smile faltered. "Mr. Tyson," she stammered, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Is everything all right?" Mike's voice was low, cold. "I need to see Principal Holloway." The receptionist swallowed hard. "She's in a meeting right now, but I can—" "Now!" There was something in his tone, something barely restrained that made her nod quickly. Hands trembling, she picked up the phone and dialed. Mike barely registered what she was saying. His pulse was a thunderous drumbeat in his ears. A door at the far end of the hallway swung open. Principal Janet Holloway stepped out, her sharp eyes scanning the room until they landed on him. She was a middle-aged woman with dark brown hair pulled into a neat bun, her suit crisp, professional. But the second she saw the storm brewing in Mike's expression, her posture stiffened. "Mr. Tyson," she greeted, her voice calm but cautious. "I wasn't expecting you." Mike stepped toward her, his presence commanding. "You know exactly why I'm here." Principal Holloway's lips pressed together. "Why don't we discuss this in my office?" "I'm not here to talk." Mike's voice was edged with steel. "I'm here for answers." She exhaled, shifting the files in her arms. "Mr. Callaway is currently teaching an after-school lesson." "Where?" Her hesitation told him everything. She knew. Maybe not the full extent, but she knew something was wrong. Mike's patience snapped. "I just spoke to Mia," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less dangerous. "She told me everything. About how Callaway humiliated her. About how he took her skirt away. About how he said our kind should be seen that way." Principal Holloway paled. Her grip on the files tightened. Mike stepped even closer, towering over her. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I'll ask you one more time. Where is he?" Before she could answer, another voice cut through the hallway. "Mr. Tyson." What an unexpected surprise. Mike turned his head slowly. There he was. Richard Callaway stood just a few feet away, a smug smile curling at the corners of his thin lips. He adjusted the sleeves of his suit jacket, his glasses perched neatly on the bridge of his nose. He looked like every other arrogant little man Mike had met in his life, small in spirit, hiding behind a false sense of authority. "I assume this visit is about Mia?" Callaway mused, feigning sympathy. Mike didn't respond immediately. He was too busy imagining how easily he could snap this man in half. Callaway sighed, shaking his head. "I understand she had a rough day. Some children struggle with discipline, but we try our best to. Mike moved so fast that Calloway barely had time to react. In two strides, he closed the distance, grabbing the teacher by the collar and slamming him against the nearest set of lockers. The metal doors rattled on impact. Calloway let out a strangled gasp, his glasses slipping down his nose. The hallway fell silent. Principal Holloway took a shocked step back. The receptionist covered her mouth. A few lingering students froze mid-stride, their gazes darting between the two men. Mike's massive hand pinned Calloway in place. His voice was a low growl. "You humiliated my daughter," he said, his grip tightening. "You stripped her of her dignity. You made her feel like she was nothing." Calloway's hands clawed at Mike's wrist, his confidence cracking like cheap glass. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his voice shaking. Mike slammed his fist into the locker beside Calloway's head, leaving a deep dent in the metal. The teacher flinched violently. His face went pale. "I should rip you apart," Mike muttered. "Mike, stop." Principal Holloway's voice finally broke through the haze. "There are students watching." Mike's chest rose and fell heavily. His knuckles were white from how tightly he was gripping Calloway's collar. Calloway was terrified now. The amusement was gone. He knew what was coming. Mike forced himself to breathe. He slowly released Calloway but didn't step back. His eyes burned into the teacher's, promising this wasn't over. Principal Holloway swallowed hard. "Please, Mr. Tyson," she urged, trying to regain control. "Let's handle this in my office." Mike's gaze never wavered from Calloway. "You're not walking away from this," he warned, a voice deadly quiet. Calloway's breath was uneven. His hands trembled at his sides. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Mike Tyson's fists clenched at his sides as he glared at Richard Calloway, the man who had humiliated his daughter. The cowardly teacher still looked shaken, adjusting his wrinkled suit with trembling hands. His thin, smug smile had long since vanished, replaced by barely contained fear. Principal Holloway stepped in between them, her voice tight with authority. "Mr. Tyson, I understand your anger, but this isn't the way to handle it." Mike barely acknowledged her. His focus was locked onto Calloway, watching the teacher's every nervous twitch, every shallow breath. This was a man who thought he was untouchable, a man who had used his position to strip a child of her dignity. And yet, for all his arrogance, there was something else in his eyes now. Not just fear, panic. Calloway wasn't just scared of Mike. He was scared of something else. Mike took a slow step forward, his presence towering over the teacher. "You're afraid," he murmured, "not of me, of something bigger." Calloway flinched but quickly tried to mask it. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. Mike narrowed his eyes. "Then why are your hands shaking?" Principal Holloway cleared her throat. "Mr. Tyson, I need you to leave." Mike exhaled sharply, forcing himself to step back, but his mind was racing. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just about Calloway's cruelty toward Mia. There was more to this story. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of something in the teacher's expression, a flicker of hesitation, a moment of uncertainty. And then it hit him. Mia's words. "He has a box. He keeps it in his desk. It's full of lollipops." Mike's blood ran cold. Something about the way Mia had described it, the way Calloway reacted when he dropped one, felt off. A grown man hoarding candy? Getting nervous when people saw them? That wasn't normal. Mike stopped in his tracks. He turned to Principal Holloway. "I need to see his classroom." Calloway's eyes went wide. "You can't." Mike's hand shot out so fast that Calloway flinched, but he didn't touch him. He simply pointed. "You just told me Mia misinterpreted the situation. So let's go check your desk and clear all this up." Calloway's mouth opened, then closed. Principal Holloway hesitated, looking between them. She had been trying to de-escalate the situation, but now she looked uncertain. "Calloway," she said slowly, "is there something in your desk we shouldn't find?" The teacher swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward the exit. Mike saw it before it happened. Calloway ran. Mike moved instantly, lunging after him as the coward bolted down the hallway, shoving past startled students and teachers. The chase was on. Calloway ran like a desperate man, his dress shoes slapping against the polished school hallway as he bolted toward the exit. His breath came in short, panicked gasps, his arms flailing as he pushed past stunned students and teachers. But he never stood a chance. Mike Tyson was on him in an instant. The former world champion's body moved with terrifying precision, his long strides closing the distance in seconds. With one powerful lunge, he reached out and snatched Calloway by the collar, yanking him back with such force that the teacher's feet nearly lifted off the ground. Calloway let out a strangled yelp as he was slammed against the lockers, the metal rattling from the impact. "You don't run unless you have something to hide," Mike growled, his voice low and menacing. The hallway had gone silent. A few lingering students and staff stared in stunned disbelief. Principal Holloway was frozen, her face pale. Calloway's chest heaved, his hands clutching at Mike's wrist. But there was no escape. He was trapped, exposed. Mike leaned in, his dark eyes burning into the man's terrified face. "What's in your desk?" Calloway's lips trembled, but he said nothing. Mike slammed him against the lockers again, just hard enough to make his teeth chatter. "I asked you a question." Principal Holloway finally snapped out of her shock. "Mr. Tyson, stop!" Mike didn't look at her. His patience was gone. His control was razor thin. "You humiliated my daughter," he seethed. "You took her dignity. And now you ran like a guilty man." His grip tightened. "I'm going to find out why." Calloway's eyes darted wildly, looking for an escape, but there was none. He stammered. Then suddenly Principal Holloway stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Calloway, open your desk." The teacher's head snapped toward her, panic flashing across his face. Principal, please. Now." Calloway hesitated, his fingers twitched, and then, with no other option, he nodded. Mike let go of him, roughly. Calloway stumbled forward, straightening his wrinkled suit, before leading them down the hallway with trembling hands. The moment they entered the empty classroom, Mike's eyes locked onto the desk. "Open it," he ordered. Calloway's fingers shook as he fumbled with the drawers. The first two were normal: pens, lesson plans, papers. Then he reached the third drawer. It was locked. Mike's pulse quickened. "Key." Calloway's hand hovered over his pocket, reluctant. Principal Holloway folded her arms. "Now, Calloway." Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he pulled out the key. His fingers trembled as he slid it into the lock and turned it with a soft click. Slowly, he pulled open the drawer. Inside was a small, unmarked box. Mike grabbed it before Calloway could react. He flipped open the lid. Lollipops. Dozens of them, neatly stacked inside. Brightly colored, individually wrapped. At first glance, they looked innocent, but Mike wasn't fooled. He picked one up, rolling it between his fingers. It felt off. Not solid like a normal piece of candy. When he pressed against the wrapper, the surface gave slightly, as if something soft was hidden beneath the hard shell. His gut twisted. "This isn't candy," he muttered. Principal Holloway peered over his shoulder, frowning. "What?" Mike's grip tightened around the lollipop. Then, without another word, he pulled out his phone. He knew exactly who to call. Mike Tyson's fingers curled around his phone as he stepped away from Calloway, his mind racing. He had fought in some of the most brutal matches in boxing history, but right now, he felt the rawest form of fury he had ever known. This wasn't about the ring. This wasn't about a title. This was about his daughter. He dialed the number, bringing the phone to his ear. 2 rings. Then a voice answered, rough and familiar. "Tyson?" "Mark," Mike said, his voice tight. "I need a favor." Detective Mark Lawson had been a close friend for years, back from Mike's days of working with law enforcement on special cases. Lawson was sharp, relentless, and didn't play by the rules when justice was on the line. There was a pause before Lawson sighed. "This about your little girl?" Mike's jaw clenched. "Yeah. I heard what happened," Lawson said. "It's all over the precinct. You really put the fear of God into that teacher." "He's not just a predator," Mike growled. "I found something in his desk, a box of lollipops." Lawson scoffed. "Candy?" "They're not candy," Mike cut in. "The texture's off. I think they're hiding something inside." There was a brief silence. Then Lawson cursed under his breath. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Mike's stomach twisted. Drugs. Lawson exhaled sharply. Damn it. Okay, get them to me now. I'll have them tested. Mike snapped the box shut, turning to Principal Holloway. I'm taking these. She hesitated. Mr. Tyson, if they're evidence, this is official, he interrupted, his voice cold. If there's something illegal in these lollipops, Calloway isn't just a predator, he's a drug dealer. Principal Holloway paled. Calloway, standing frozen at his desk, looked even worse. His face was ghostly white, his hands trembling at his sides. His lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. He was terrified. Mike narrowed his eyes. You're not scared of me. You're scared of what happens next. Without another word, Mike strode out of the classroom, the box tucked under his arm. His truck's tires screeched against the pavement as he pulled onto the road, his hands tight around the wheel. His pulse pounded in his ears. If these lollipops were what he suspected, then Calloway wasn't working alone, and Mike was going to find out exactly who was behind it. Do you think Calloway was acting alone, or is there a bigger conspiracy at play? Comment justice. If you think Mike is about to uncover something huge, should Mike take matters into his own hands or let the police handle it? Type Tyson's way if you want him to bring the fight. Don't miss what happens next. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This isn't just about Mia anymore. This is about all the kids, and Mike Tyson isn't backing down. Mike Tyson's truck roared through the dimly lit streets of Brooklyn, the city lights flashing past in a blur. His grip on the steering wheel was iron tight, his knuckles white with the pressure. The box of lollipops sat on the passenger seat, each one now a ticking time bomb of evidence. If these things contained what he suspected, then this wasn't just about Calloway humiliating Mia. This was about something bigger, something that had been happening right under everyone's noses. He pulled into the police station's parking lot, cutting the engine before grabbing the box and stepping out. The night air was cool, but Mike's blood was still boiling. Inside, the precinct was buzzing with low conversations, the occasional ringing phone cutting through the noise. Officers turned as he passed, some whispering to each other. News had already spread. Mike Tyson just put his hands on a schoolteacher. He didn't care. He found Detective Mark Lawson in his office, seated behind a cluttered desk, his phone to his ear. The detective looked up the moment Mike entered, his expression shifting from exhaustion to immediate focus. Tell me you've got something, Lawson muttered, setting down the phone. Mike didn't speak. He dropped the box onto the desk with a dull thud and flipped open the lid. Lawson frowned, reaching for one of the lollipops. He rolled it between his fingers, his brow furrowing. They looked normal. Mike crossed his arms. Press on it. Lawson did, his thumb sinking slightly into the candy's surface. His frown deepened. That's not right, he muttered. Before Mike could respond, Lawson grabbed his desk phone and dialed. Rodriguez, I need you in my office now. A moment later, a woman in her early 40s stepped in, her sharp eyes flickering between them. Lawson handed her the lollipop. Run a field test. Now. Rodriguez nodded, taking the candy and leaving without another word. Mike leaned against the wall, his arms still crossed, his body wound tight with anticipation. Minutes crawled by. Then Rodriguez returned, holding a small evidence bag with the shattered remains of the lollipop inside. Her expression was grim. Positive for synthetic stimulants, she confirmed. Low dose, but enough to be classified as an illegal substance. Lawson let out a curse, slamming his palm against the desk. That son of a... He inhaled sharply, forcing himself to calm down. All right, we have enough to bring him in. Mike straightened. Then let's move. Lawson grabbed his jacket and his radio, calling in backup. Within minutes, a fleet of squad cars was speeding toward Calloway's residence. Mike sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, his fists clenched as the radio crackled with updates. Lights inside. No movement yet. We have eyes on both exits. They pulled up in front of a modest suburban house, tires screeching against the pavement. Officers moved into position, weapons drawn but low. Lawson signaled to his team. Let's go. They approached the front door, the tension thick in the air. Lawson pounded his fist against it. Richard Calloway, this is the police. Open the door now. Silence. Then, movement. Lawson's eyes darkened. We're breaching. The battering ram slammed against the door. And just like that, Calloway's world collapsed. The battering ram crashed against the door with a deafening boom, splintering wood on impact. The house shuddered under the force as officers swarmed forward, weapons drawn, ready to take down Richard Calloway before he could make a run for it. Mike Tyson was the first through the doorway. His massive frame moved with lethal precision, his eyes scanning the dimly lit interior. The living room was cluttered but not messy. Calloway had left in a hurry. A half-eaten plate of food sat on the coffee table. A jacket was tossed carelessly on the couch. Then he heard it, a door creaking open in the back. "He's running!" Mike didn't think. He reacted. He bolted through the living room, shoving past furniture as he raced toward the back door. The moment he reached it, he caught a glimpse of Calloway, his wrinkled suit disheveled, sweat dripping down his forehead, sprinting across the backyard toward the fence. The coward thought he could escape. Not tonight. Mike surged forward, his powerful strides closing the distance in seconds. Just as Calloway leapt, trying to pull himself over the fence, Mike grabbed him midair, yanking him down and slamming him onto the ground. The teacher let out a strangled gasp as the wind was knocked from his lungs. He clawed at the dirt, struggling, but Mike pressed his knee into his back, pinning him effortlessly. "Let me go," Calloway wheezed. You can't." Mike twisted his arm behind his back, securing him. "You had your chance." Seconds later, Lawson and the officers arrived, cuffs glinting under the backyard floodlights. "You're done," Lawson muttered as he snapped the cuffs onto Calloway's wrists. The teacher sagged, his face pressing into the dirt, his breath uneven. But Mike noticed something. He wasn't just scared of being arrested. He was scared of something else. Lawson caught the look in Mike's eyes. "You see it too, don't you?" Mike nodded, his jaw tightening. As the officers hauled Calloway to his feet, the man's eyes darted wildly, his lips trembling. "I didn't," he started, his voice breaking. "I didn't have a choice." Mike stepped closer, towering over him. "What do you mean?" Calloway swallowed hard. His gaze flickered between them, desperation bleeding into his expression. "If I talk, I'm dead." Lawson let out a sharp breath. "Who's protecting you?" The teacher clenched his jaw, refusing to speak. Mike's stomach twisted. This wasn't over. Calloway wasn't just a predator. He was a pawn. As the squad cars pulled away, taking the disgraced teacher toward the precinct, Mike stood in the driveway, fists still clenched. Mia was safe. Calloway would never step foot in that school again. But deep down, Mike knew this was only the beginning. There was still someone out there, and Mike wasn't stopping until he found them.